Recording begins. Academic Lecture Series, Catastrophic Miscalculations in Galactic History. Welcome, students. I am Professor Korax Vun, Senior Military Historian for the Centauri Coalition Archives and, unfortunately for the Draxan Empire, one of the few surviving witnesses to what we now call the Mercy Convoy incident. Look at your faces. So eager to learn about humans, aren't you? Hey. I remember when I had that same fascination, before I knew better. Before I watched them turn the mighty Draxan war fleets into orbital debris fields. Let me transport you back 52 cycles ago. Humans had just achieved faster than light travel, rather primitive tech by our standards, but functional enough. The Galactic Council granted them probationary status, which was standard procedure for newcomers. Most species spend decades proving themselves worthy of full membership. Most species are content to learn, observe, and follow our ancient protocols. Humans were different. Impatient little creatures, my colleague Ambassador Zenturi said at the time. Always talking, always moving, always wanting more information than they need. We categorized them as a curiosity species worth studying but not to be taken seriously. Too emotional, too unpredictable for the calculated dance of galactic politics. Their representatives would sometimes laugh during serious negotiations, or use humor to diffuse tensions in ways that baffled our diplomats. Their ships were bulky, their weapons primitive. Their treaties included strange clauses about human rights and non-negotiable ethical principles. We humored them, of course. You always humor the new species until they learn their place in the grand hierarchy of the cosmos. What fools we were. Pauses to adjust recording equipment. The Draxan Empire made the worst mistake possible. They assumed humans were like us, that they would respond to aggression with careful deliberation, formal complaints, and years of diplomatic posturing. They were catastrophically wrong. Here's something you won't find in the official records. When the Galactic Security Council first heard what happened to the human rescue convoy, First Minister Glaptu-1 actually laughed. "Now they'll learn how things really work out here," he said. 3 weeks later, his homeworld was under blockade, and no one was laughing anymore. Drinks water nervously. Let me tell you why no advanced civilization in this galaxy dares to threaten human aid workers anymore. The incident began on the border colony of Proxima Centauri IV, or as humans called it, New Hope. Such an optimistic name. That should have been our first clue about their nature. New Hope was suffering from an outbreak of Rigelian fever. Nasty business, liquefies the organs in 3 days if untreated. The colony had exhausted their medical supplies, and the nearest Centauri medical station was 2 weeks away at best speeds. Then the humans did something unprecedented. Rather than accepting the statistical casualties as any rational species would, they dispatched an emergency convoy from Earth itself. 5 vessels, stripped of weapons to make room for medical supplies and equipment. Their fastest ships, crewed by volunteer doctors and nurses. The convoy was led by the UNSS Nightingale, commanded by Captain Maya Suarez. We've since recovered her personal logs, and you know what she wrote before departure? "Every minute costs lives. We'll sleep when we're dead." Shakes head. Such dramatic creatures, but they meant it. They modified their engines to dangerous levels, pushing their ships beyond safe parameters. 3 engineers died from radiation exposure during the journey, but they kept going. The Draxan Empire controlled the most direct route to New Hope. By galactic law, the humans submitted their flight plan and purpose 7 days before reaching Draxan space. Here's where the magnificent blunder occurs. The Draxan High Command was engaged in suppressing a rebellion on one of their mining moons. They saw the incoming human vessels, and despite crystal-clear documentation of their medical mission, concluded it must be a covert operation to supply the rebels. Admiral Kazktar of the Draxan Defense Fleet made the decision without consulting his superiors. A precautionary measure, he called it later during his war crimes trial. The human convoy was halfway through Draxan space when it happened. 3 Draxan battlecruisers decloaked and opened fire without warning. The human ships, carrying no weapons and minimal shielding to make room for medical supplies, never stood a chance. The Nightingale was hit first, its medical bay erupting into space. Imagine that for a moment, thousands of vaccine vials glittering like stars as they scattered into the void. The other ships attempted evasive maneuvers, broadcasting their non-combatant status on all frequencies. The Draxans ignored these pleas and methodically destroyed all 5 vessels. Eyes drops to near whisper. 278 human medical personnel died in the attack. Captain Suarez was the last to go. Her final transmission was broadcast across all known frequencies. I've heard the recording. She didn't beg for mercy or curse her attackers. She simply said, "Earth. They fired on a rescue convoy. Coordinates attached. They knew who we were." Then silence. Fragments of the Nightingale's hull were later recovered and placed in a memorial on Earth. I've seen it, a stark monument of twisted metal and names. Humans touch it when they pass by, as if connecting with the dead. Within 24 hours of that transmission reaching Earth, humanity's response began. And that, my young students, is when the galaxy learned what a terrible mistake Admiral Kazktar had made. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session after the attack. I was there as a junior observer, barely important enough to have a seat at the back of the chamber. The prevailing mood was one of mild concern, but nothing approaching alarm. The humans will file a formal protest, High Chancellor Lorix predicted with absolute certainty. We'll establish a committee to investigate the incident, arrange reparations, perhaps censure the Draxan Empire. The Draxan ambassador, Vorktul, even seemed bored. He shuffled his documents and muttered something about regrettable miscommunications and appropriate compensation for loss of life. 7 hours into this tedious debate, a Proxima monitoring station sent an urgent alert. The humans had mobilized their entire Sol defense fleet. Every warship in their possession was moving toward Draxan space. Surely a symbolic gesture, said the Rigelian ambassador. It was not. He adjusts collar uncomfortably. 312 human warships entered hyperspace before the council session had even adjourned. No formal declaration of war, no ultimatum delivered. Just immediate, coordinated action. Their parliament voted unanimously. Do you understand how rare that is for humans? They never agree on anything. To authorize all necessary force. The fleet was led by the UNSS Retribution, commanded by Admiral Penelope Blackwood. Until that moment, she'd been unknown outside human military circles. We would all come to know her name very well. The council frantically dispatched mediators. I traveled with Ambassador Zenturi to the human embassy, where we were met by a junior diplomatic officer named Marcus Reeves. The ambassador began our carefully prepared speech about galactic protocols and the proper channels for addressing grievances. Reeves cut him off mid-sentence. With respect, Ambassador, he said, though his tone suggested none, we're not interested in filing a complaint. But there are procedures, Zenturi protested. Reeves handed him a data tablet. This isn't a negotiation. It's a courtesy notification of military action already underway. We were stunned. The Draxan Empire controlled 37 star systems. They had been a galactic power for millennia before humans tamed fire. And yet these newcomers were acting as if. Pauses, shakes head. The Arcturian delegation tried next, appealing directly to Admiral Blackwood via quantum communication. Her response became infamous throughout the galaxy. The time for talking, she said, her face unnervingly calm, ended when they fired on doctors and nurses. You had centuries to teach the Draxans better manners. Now it's our turn. But Admiral, the Arcturian pleaded, this could trigger a galactic war. Blackwood looked genuinely puzzled. It already has, she replied. You just don't realize it yet. Then she terminated the connection. Our intelligence on human military capabilities was, to put it mildly, catastrophically incomplete. We had always focused our analysis on their commercial vessels, the ones that visited our stations and planets. Their military kept to themselves, and we never thought to look closer. Why would we? They were just another fledgling species. The first engagement occurred at the Draxan border outpost Krell 9. The station commander, General Draz, had a distinguished military record spanning 2 centuries. When sensors detected approaching human vessels, he was reportedly amused. "Let them come," he told his officers. "A single lesson will suffice." He deployed a standard defensive formation of 30 warships, enough to annihilate the pitiful human fleet twice over, according to his calculations. What happened next still gives military strategists nightmares. The human ships dropped out of hyperspace at distances our tacticians considered absurdly close, practically suicide by conventional doctrine. But before the Draxan fleet could capitalize on this apparent blunder, the humans unleashed weapons we'd never seen before. Leans forward intently. Their ships fired what we now call kinetic penetrators. Is relatively simple technology, really. Tungsten rods accelerated to near relativistic speeds. No energy signatures to detect, no fancy shields could stop them. The first salvo tore through the pride of the Draxan fleet like paper. Then came their electromagnetic pulse weapons, which completely neutralized Draxan targeting systems. The Draxigs, blind and disoriented, fired wildly into empty space while human ships executed maneuvers that our experts had deemed physically impossible. General Draz frantically called for reinforcements. They arrived just in time to join the slaughter. 27 minutes after engagement began, the entire Draxan defensive fleet was destroyed. 27 minutes. The station itself surrendered immediately, but Admiral Blackwood wasn't accepting surrenders that day. The Retribution fired a single shot that cracked the station's reactor containment. We later calculated that 12,000 Draxan military personnel died in the resulting explosion. The humans didn't even slow down to verify kills. They just continued toward the next target. Takes a drink of water with visibly shaking hands. The shocking thing wasn't just that humans won, it was how they fought. All our military doctrines emphasized measured responses, calculated exchanges of fire, strategic positions maintained. Humans fought like a force of nature, overwhelming, relentless, seemingly unconcerned with their own losses. When 3 human destroyers were crippled during the second engagement at Draxus Prime, their crews deliberately crashed their vessels into the Draxan flagship rather than retreat. The psychological impact of such actions cannot be overstated. How do you fight an enemy who treats death as just another weapon? I was in the Strategic Command Center when reports came in of the human advance toward the Draxan homeworld. Admiral Keir Vosh of the Centauri Defense Force watched the tactical displays in horrified silence before turning to me. "We've been monitoring the wrong aspects of human development," he said quietly. "We cataloged their art, philosophy, and commerce while ignoring the fact that they've spent their entire history fighting themselves. They've had more wars in a millennium than the rest of the galactic community combined has had in 50 millennia. The Draxan High Command, finally grasping the severity of their situation, attempted to establish a defensive perimeter around their core worlds. They deployed their legendary 7th Fleet veterans of the Andromedan conflicts, equipped with their most advanced technology. Admiral Blackwood's response was intercepted by our intelligence services. She told her captains simply, "No survivors." Looks directly at audience. They didn't leave any. The galactic community's reaction to the human offensive can only be described as mass panic. Species that had barely acknowledged humanity's existence were suddenly obsessed with understanding these terrifying newcomers. An emergency summit was hastily convened on neutral territory, the ancient space station Harmony, which had hosted peace talks for 20,000 years. Representatives from all major galactic powers attended, including, for the first time, a human delegation led by Ambassador Talon Quinn. Quinn was nothing like the diplomatic representatives we'd met before. No meek junior official this time. He strode into the grand chamber flanked by military officers wearing the same insignia as the warships currently decimating the Draxan Empire. The message was unmistakable. High Chancellor Lorik spoke first, practically begging for restraint. "This regrettable incident can surely be resolved without further bloodshed," he stammered. "The Draxan Empire acknowledges its error and offers reparations." Quinn's response echoed through the chamber. "Reparations?" He actually laughed. "You still don't understand what's happening, do you? This isn't a negotiation to end a conflict. The conflict will end when the Draxan military capability has been completely neutralized." Mimics gasps from the assembly. The Zelvan representative, renowned for their cool, logical approach, attempted to reason with Quinn. "Surely complete destruction is disproportionate to the offense. The attack was a tragic mistake." Quinn cut her off. "They fired on doctors, nurses, on people whose only mission was to save lives. There was no mistake. Their vessels were clearly marked. Their mission was properly filed. They responded to hails identifying themselves, and they were deliberately destroyed." The Arconian ambassador, desperate to prevent further escalation, proposed a ceasefire to allow for mediated discussions. "While we talk," Quinn replied, "the same Draxan commanders who ordered the attack on our medical ships would be fortifying their positions. That's not happening." I remember watching the faces around that chamber, the dawning horror, as they realized humans would not be playing by our rules. For millennia, galactic conflicts had been carefully managed affairs. Limited engagements, proportional responses, political maneuvering. Humans fought to win. Completely. Devastatingly. Without hesitation. Lower's voice dramatically. The Medusan representative finally asked the question everyone was thinking. What do humans want? What will satisfy this blood debt? Quinn's answer was chilling in its simplicity. "Justice," he said, "and a galaxy that understands one simple rule: you don't target those who come to heal. Not ever." As the summit dissolved into chaos, I overheard the Arctelian military attaché whispering to his superior. "We need to reevaluate everything we know about humans. Their technology, their psychology, their military doctrine, it's all wrong." His superior nodded grimly. "And pray we never give them reason to turn their attention to us." What began as a regrettable incident rapidly evolved into the most devastating conflict the galaxy had witnessed in 50,000 years. The humans didn't just attack military targets, they systematically dismantled the entire Draxan war machine. Within 3 weeks, they had destroyed or captured 17 major Draxan shipyards. Within 2 months, they controlled every strategic resource node in Draxian space. What shocked military observers wasn't just the speed, it was the method. Pulls up holographic display showing battle formations. Conventional galactic warfare followed predictable patterns established over millennia. Fleets would engage at standardized distances. There were recognized positions of advantage, acceptable losses, strategic withdrawals. Humans ignored all of that. They attacked from impossible vectors, at point-blank ranges no sane commander would consider. They used civilian mining ships retrofitted with military-grade shields as battering rams. They deliberately vented their reactor cores to create radiation clouds that disabled Draxan sensors. One human captain, Eliza Frost of the UNSS Tempest, allowed her ship to take critical damage so that it appeared dead in space. When Draxan vessels approached to capture the wreckage, she detonated hidden charges that destroyed 3 enemy cruisers, along with her own vessel. The humans celebrated her as a hero. They named a new destroyer class after her. Shakes head in disbelief. The Draxan Empire had conquered 11 species over their 9,000-year history. They had never known defeat. But as world after world fell to human forces, panic spread through their hierarchy. Supreme Commander Vorsh, the most decorated military leader in Draxan history, committed suicide rather than report another defeat to the Emperor. Their legendary Helix squadron, undefeated for 7 centuries, was reduced to radioactive debris in under 6 minutes when they engaged Admiral Blackwood's flagship group. In desperation, the Draxans deployed their planet-killer weapon against the human colony on Proxima Centauri IE. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. Yes, they destroyed the colony and killed 6 million human settlers. Voice drops to whisper. In response, humans didn't just escalate, they changed the fundamental nature of the conflict. Admiral Blackwood implemented what humans called Protocol Zero. Every Draxan military installation, regardless of size or strategic value, was targeted for complete destruction. No surrenders were accepted. No prisoners were taken. To understand why humans fought this way, you must understand something fundamental about their psychology. For most galactic species, warfare is an extension of politics, a way to secure advantages or resources. For humans, warfare against those who violated their moral codes became a crusade. They weren't fighting for territory or political gain, they were delivering judgment. The Draxan Emperor, in a final desperate move, offered unconditional surrender, the first time in their history they had ever made such an offer. He sent his own children as hostages to demonstrate sincerity. The human response? Admiral Blackwood accepted the hostages, acknowledged the surrender offer, and continued her attacks without pause. Projects footage of devastated Draxan worlds. When questioned about this apparent violation of warfare conventions, Admiral Blackwood explained human thinking with terrifying clarity. They targeted healers. They broke the most fundamental rule of civilized conflict. The surrender should have come before they crossed that line, not after they realized the consequences. The most chilling aspect was the cold efficiency of it all. There was no rage in human communications, no heated rhetoric. They executed their campaign with mathematical precision. Draxan officials expecting to negotiate with emotional creatures found instead an implacable force methodically working through a checklist of targets. As the great Draxan fortress world of Kor Vex fell after a 90-minute battle, the defending admiral sent a final transmission that has since become famous in military academies throughout the galaxy. They do not fight like a species at war. They operate like an immune system eliminating a disease. The breaking point, the moment when the mighty Draxan Empire truly understood the magnitude of their error, came exactly 42 days after the destruction of the medical convoy. Emperor Kraz Tak, last of a royal line stretching back 12,000 years, convened his remaining war council in the ancient throne room on their homeworld, Draxus Prime. Only 7 of the original 30 counselors were still alive. The rest had been killed in battle, committed suicide, or been executed for failure. Our intelligence networks intercepted the Emperor's address. I'll never forget his words. We have awakened something that cannot be put back to sleep. Something that does not understand mercy because it believes we have forfeited the right to receive it. Mimics the Emperor's distressed tone. That same day, the Emperor took an unprecedented step. He traveled personally, risking his own sacred person, to the neutral Arcturian station with a formal document of unconditional surrender. The terms he offered were astonishing: complete disarmament, war reparations amounting to 80% of the Empire's economic output for 50 years, the ritual suicide of every officer involved in the convoy attack, and the surrender of 12 core worlds to human control. By any sane measure, it was more than generous. It was abject capitulation. The human representative, not even Admiral Blackwood herself, but merely a junior commander named Jackson Wright, received the document, read it carefully, and then responded with 5 words that shook the galaxy: the terms are not accepted. The Emperor, forgetting all protocol, dropped to his knees before a lower-ranking officer of an upstart species. "What more could you possibly want?" he begged. Commander Wright's response was delivered without emotion. "Admiral Blackwood asked me to convey that your surrender will be accepted when the Draxan Empire no longer possesses the capability to fire on medical ships. Not before. Looks around the room gravely. 3 days later, human forces breached Draxus Prime's orbital defenses. They could have destroyed the planet from orbit. Instead, they landed troops the first time ground forces had been deployed in the conflict. I was with a Centauri observation team monitoring from a safe distance. We watched in horror as human soldiers, not automated drones as any sensible species would use, but actual living warriors, methodically captured every military installation on the planet. They didn't harm civilians. They didn't destroy cultural treasures. They simply eliminated everything that could potentially be used for war. Weapons facilities, command centers, strategic resources, military academies, all reduced to rubble with surgical precision. It was during this final phase that I finally understood why humans fought so differently from every other species. The revelation came when I observed a group of human soldiers pause their advance to treat injured Draxan civilians caught in the crossfire. The same species that showed absolutely no mercy to Draxan military forces would risk their own lives to save Draxan children. Their medics, wearing the same insignia as those killed on the convoy, worked tirelessly to heal the very species they were destroying. Voice filled with wonder. That's when I realized the truth. Humans didn't fight for conquest or resources or even revenge. They fought to enforce a moral code that was more important to them than life itself. The principle that those who heal must never be harmed, that the defenseless must be protected, even at terrible cost. It wasn't hatred driving their merciless campaign. It was something far more dangerous, righteous purpose. On the 100th day of what would later be called the Mercy War, Admiral Penelope Blackwood finally accepted the Draxan surrender. The ceremony took place not in a grand hall befitting galactic powers, but in the makeshift memorial the humans had erected on the debris field where the medical convoy had been destroyed. The terms were unprecedented in galactic history. The Draxan military was not merely reduced, it was eliminated. Every warship, weapons factory, and military installation was dismantled or destroyed. The military officer class, all 6 million of them, were stripped of rank and assigned to rebuild the medical infrastructure of worlds devastated by the conflict. But what truly shocked galactic observers were the non-military provisions. Project's holographic document. The Draxans were required to build medical academies on every world in their former empire. 1/3 of their economic output for the next century would fund a new galactic medical corps, staffed by personnel from all species. Every Draxan citizen would undergo mandatory education in medical, ethics, and the treatment of non-combatants during conflict. Most symbolically, the Emperor himself was reassigned to serve as a medical orderly in a human hospital for a period of 20 years. Not as punishment, but as, in Admiral Blackwood's words, remedial education in the value of healing. When the peace terms were published, the galactic power structure experienced what humans colorfully called a paradigm shift. Species that had dominated for millennia suddenly found themselves reassessing their position relative to these terrifying newcomers. The Arctelian hegemony, which had been planning minor border incursions against human colonies, quietly abandoned those plans. The Zelvan collective, renowned for their logical approach to all matters, calculated the probable outcome of conflict with humans and immediately proposed a series of technology exchange programs to improve relations. Chuckles darkly. Most telling was the reaction of the Creel Imperium, the oldest and most aggressive empire in the galaxy. Their High Marshal, upon receiving a full briefing on the human Draxan conflict, reportedly destroyed the data tablet and issued new standing orders. Under no circumstances are human medical vessels, personnel, or facilities to be targeted, threatened, or impeded in any way, regardless of military necessity. This directive supersedes all others. The humans, for their part, returned to their previous pursuits with disturbing normality. Their warships resumed peaceful exploration. Their diplomats returned to discussing trade agreements as if they hadn't just dismantled an empire that had stood for 9 millennia. Admiral Blackwood retired to teach at their military academy. looks directly at students. And this, young scholars, is the critical lesson that the galaxy learned at tremendous cost. Humans are not like us. They can shift from peaceful cooperation to overwhelming violence with a speed and totality that defies conventional understanding. They do not fight for territory or resources or even survival. They fight for their principles. In all your future diplomatic and military careers, remember this: never harm those humans consider innocent or defenseless. Never target their healers. Never assume they will hesitate to unleash their full military potential if these lines are crossed. And never, ever mistake their preference for peace as an inability or unwillingness to wage war. Before I conclude this lecture, I want to share Admiral Blackwood's response when asked by the Galactic Council if humans would join the established mutual defense pacts that had maintained peace for millennia. Project's final holographic recording. "Humanity doesn't need defensive pacts," she said, looking each delegate in the eye. "We don't need guarantees or treaties to respond when innocents are harmed. Today we defended our own. Tomorrow we might defend yours. Not because of politics or alliances, but because it's the right thing to do. That's something your empires still don't understand about us." Pauses recording. After that statement, 17 galactic powers immediately requested human military advisors. 23 revised their rules of engagement to specifically protect medical personnel. And all of them, every single species, began watching human ships with a new emotion many of them had never experienced before. Some would call it fear. The wiser ones recognized it as respect. Thank you for attending today's lecture. Remember, the next time you see a human medical vessel, be very, very polite. Recording ends.